Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. So wonderful to have you here. I'm so glad to be here in this room with you and having the opportunity to deliver this information once again. And I'm real excited about it because I've got a whole bunch of new stuff to talk about. So I'm going to kind of walk you through a little bit of the way I discovered this information and the way I came across it, my logic through it, and the path I took. And if I walk you through the same path I took, you'll see that it actually is a very simple path. It's a very simple way of thinking. It's very fundamental and very simple axioms that just needs very little adjustments in our current physics and science and so on to generate just a little bit of a different picture that opens doors to a whole new way of being. And so, although this information may seem quite complex, it actually, is very accessible to everyone. And I teach this to 7 years old and to 80 years old, and everybody can get it. So keep your mind open, keep your heart open, and we'll go from there. So it really started when I was approximately 9 years old. I could have been 10 or 9, but I remember very distinctly this first lesson at school. And interestingly, I found that many other people had the same kind of hick when they got into this first lesson. It was the first lesson in geometry. And the teacher went to the blackboard and said, today we're going to learn about geometry, and the first lesson in geometry is dimensions. And I got really excited because I had all these incredible world that I was living in my head, and I had all these interaction with all these other dimensions in my head, and I thought, oh my God, this teacher is going to talk about this for the first time ever. I'm going to have an adult that talks about this, and I got really excited about it, and I got so disappointed. It wasn't at all what I expected. The teacher went to the blackboard and made a little dot. And he placed beside the dot dimension 0, 0D, and said this is a dot that represents a dimension that does not exist. And I was already confused. I'm like, oh my God, this is not looking good. I'm probably going to fail this class because I could see the dot. And he was telling me that it didn't exist. And so already I had a problem with that fundamental axiom. And really, this is so crucial. This is so crucial to our understanding of reality. This very fundamental axiom of dimension bleeds into advanced physics, advanced mathematics, and all sorts of sciences, and really changes the picture of the way we see things if, it's not accurate. So I didn't know all this, but I thought, well, I can see the dot, but if you say it doesn't exist, I'll just go with that. And then he said, well, because it doesn't have volume, it doesn't exist. So if you put a bunch of dots together and make a line, you still don't have volume. We'll call that dimension 1. And that doesn't exist either. And, I just kept on going with it. And I could see the other kids in the class were a little bit puzzled about what was going on. And then eventually, he put 4 lines together to make a plane, called it dimension 2, and said that didn't exist either. It still didn't have volume. It was a 2-dimensional flat plane. And, you know, I could see, he used the example that the cartoons in our cartoon books didn't exist, right? And so I could see a lot of the kids were very disappointed. And then he did something extraordinary, something miraculous, something that even puzzled me further. He took 6 planes, put them into a cube, and called it 3D, and said that dimension exists because it has volume. And I could see that everybody was like, okay. There was a problem in logic there. Turns out that I found out much later that Buckminster Fuller had exactly the same problem in his schooling in his first lessons in geometry. There was a problem there because if you have a dot that doesn't exist, that makes a line that doesn't exist, that makes a plane that doesn't exist, then you cannot get existence out of 6 non-existing planes. So what you get is some unknown feature that could only be called non-existence to the 4th. Not existence. And so here, fundamentally, there's an issue. And that issue has to do with our understanding of how reality emerges, how dimensions are generated, and how we can get existence, reality, atoms, objects, things in space, and how we solve the equations that describe how these things in space come through, how they get here. That is very fundamental. I didn't know all this at the time, but I knew that this principle that was being demonstrated to me was not quite correct. There was definitely improvements that had to be done to it. And I really felt like I didn't want to spend another day going through my life not knowing what a dimension was. So I decided I was going to solve this. And, you know, I had this long bus ride going all the way back home. It was like an hour and a half from that school. And the reason for that is because I kept on getting kicked out of the schools that were closer to my home. So I kept on having to go further and further. And somebody told me, a physicist told me once, that I was furthering my education that way. And he was right, because I had all this time to think in the bus. So I was in the bus and I was thinking about this problem, and I decided I was going to solve that problem before I got out of that bus. And I didn't realize that this problem had been discussed and worked on by many philosophers throughout the ages and so on, all the way down to the Pythagorean schools. I just wanted to solve it right there and then. And so I was thinking, and the bus was getting fuller and fuller, and I was getting hotter and hotter, and it was really, you know, becoming uncomfortable. So I closed my eyes, and in my mind's eye, I escaped the bus so that I would feel more comfortable. And I start to see that the bus would, as I rose above it, the bus would become a dot. And then I rose further, and I saw the Earth becoming a dot. And then I rose further, and I saw the solar system becoming a dot. And I rose further again, and I saw the galaxy becoming a dot. And then I started to fly back into the galaxy, into the solar system, back to the Earth. And I located the bus I was in, and back into that bus, and back into my body. And I opened my eyes, and I looked at my hand, and I thought, oh, maybe I could fly into my hand. And so I closed my eyes again, and I thought of flying into my hand, and I saw that inside my hand would be dots that are called cells, and then inside those cells I would see millions and millions of other dots that are called atoms. I probably didn't even know what an atom was at the time. And I continued in, and I saw, you know, the nuclei of an atom that was made out of smaller dots, and then again smaller dots, and so on. And I thought, and then I got it. I had this moment of illumination. And then in the bus, you know, going back from school, oh yes, the only solution to this riddle, the only way you can solve this, the only way you can, the only way you can visualize, understand dimension, is if you make the exact opposite axiom right from the beginning, which is that the only thing that exists is the dot. So here, within the dot is all dimensions. Within the dot, we have all the structure of space-time. Within the dot, all possible other dimensions became in existence. That's the way I saw it, meaning that if we continue to divide the dot, we could find smaller and smaller and smaller dots, and those would be like scales of dimensions. And that the only thing that exists is the dot. And it is only from your perspective that you define the scale at which you observe those dimensions. I mean, that was a completely different view, definitely. And I thought, well, if the dot, if zero dimension is all dimension in one, then that would mean that everybody that I'm looking at in this bus has all the dimensions, all the structure of space-time compactify in every dot. I mean, I wasn't thinking in terms of space-time, but I was thinking in terms of fractal dimensions. I didn't know fractals, but I had defined it in my head. And I got really excited. I was walking on a cloud. I got up in the bus and I didn't know what to do. I was like, oh my God, I think I got it. Everything is a dot. Every dot has infinity within it. Everything can be divided to infinity. And there's dots to infinity, infinitely big, infinitely small. We're living in a big dot that has little dots in it and little dots in it. And I was seeing dots everywhere.